This meeting will be made available on the Accounts Commission website as soon as possible and also available on request. Members of the public are also welcome to observe the public session of the Commission meetings. Those observing the meeting today, thanks for taking the time to join us, and you're very welcome. But please remember, you're here to observe, not to participate in the meeting. And if you're joining online, please keep your camera off, your microphone on mute at all times. Our Commission members meeting today, and we're meeting mostly in person today, which is good. Please keep your camera on wherever possible, but keep your microphone on mute, except when you're called to speak. I think you keep your microphone on mute at all times. If you wish to speak, please use the raise the hand function. It just makes it easier to manage when people come in for questions. Please do not use the chat function for discussions unless you're having a technical issue that prevents you from speaking. May I ask all who are speaking during the meeting, whether in person or online, to speak clearly and loudly, these for the benefit of the recording and for any colleagues who have reduced hearing. I believe there are some members from Argyll and Bute, so welcome, although clearly can't see you. Welcome. So that takes us to item 1, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
We've got apologies from Angela Leach, Commission member, and Nicola Brown is joining us online via Teams.
Andy's missing at the moment, but he's due back in later on. Any declarations of connections that are not currently picked up or relevant to the paper agenda items today? I think I take that as nil. That's good. Okay. Order of business item 3. Can I ask, as normal, to seek the Commission's approval for the order of business as of today? I propose that we consider items 9 to 15 in private for reasons set out in our agenda. Are members agreed? Okay. Takes into item 4, which is the minutes and matters arising from the previous meeting. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll assume that the minutes are taken as read. If there's any issues of accuracy, I'm happy to pick them up. There were 3 actions outstanding from the last meeting. The first 2 are related. The first one was on meeting arrangements, and the second was on engagement options. And those 2 issues will come back to the Commission at the next meeting. And the third action around the definition of care experienced disabled and non-disabled people in residential care, that was sent out to Commission members.
Nicola?
Morning, everyone. Just a minor thing, Chair. I was at the last meeting. I had let Lee know that was just a small omission. So if that can be corrected, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so content to approve subject to that amendment.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That takes us to item 5, best value review of Argyll and Bute Council. This item is a statutory report by the Controller of Audit on best value in Argyll and Bute. This audit draws attention to the findings from the Council's 23-24 annual report and how effectively the Council demonstrates best value. The Commission is invited to consider and approve the Controller's report in this session. The Controller and the audit team are here to provide any clarifications or answers to questions that members may have on both the Controller's report and the annual audit report as it relates to best value. We will then consider in private later today how we wish to proceed. I'm going to hand over to Helena now.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I welcome the opportunity to discuss my report on best value at Argyll and Bute Council with the Commission this morning, alongside Mark Outside from Mazars, who led the audit. Argyll and Bute has made good progress in demonstrating its commitment to continuous improvement since its best value assurance report in May 2020, and all improvement actions agreed following that report have now been marked as complete. The Council corporate plan sets a clear vision aligned with the local improvement plan, but a change in political leadership in April 2024 means that work is still ongoing to update the corporate plan along with other key policy documents to reflect this change, and this is expected to be completed later this spring. The Council has mechanisms in place to engage with the community through budget consultations and has established a community engagement group to help strengthen its approach. This group is expected to develop a community engagement framework and tools for engagement activities in early 2025. The council has established performance monitoring arrangements in place, reporting performance audits at area committees on a quarterly basis, as well as annual reporting on progress against the council's business plan. The auditor has highlighted, however, that arrangements could be improved by articulating a clearer golden thread, knitting these plans together with some stronger KPIs. The council is actively taking this recommendation forward. In terms of performance against outcomes, the council's reporting of its performance in its annual report, as well as a review of the local government benchmarking framework, highlights a mixed picture. I'll conclude by highlighting that auditors have concluded the council has effective financial planning, budget monitoring and reporting arrangements in place. The council has a good track record of delivering planned savings, and the majority of these were recurring. However, auditors have highlighted that the council does not have an aggregate savings plan and would benefit from taking a more strategic approach to considering and monitoring savings. Like many councils, the council is facing a budget gap in future years, although that position will of course need to be updated following its budget settlement. The council has set aside reserves to support spend to save initiatives, and I look forward to seeing more detail in due course on how those will be used and the outcomes they expect to deliver. And I'll stop there, but obviously very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Helena. Right on the process. No, so we're currently in a position of discussing this report. We will in private discuss how we wish to proceed. In order to have this session, we tend to group questions into themes. So today we have, again, for those watching online, you have 6 themes around finance, performance, transformation, leadership, workforce and community engagement. Can I ask, if we start with finance, can I ask Mike to open up the questioning?
Thank you very much. No, you're very much okay. Thanks very much for the report and for the update. In terms of the trying to get a picture of the approach to savings in this in our government views, we seem to be seeing a 3-year budget gap, which is not out of line with many others. But there's also comments, I think you referred to as well, around the non-strategic approach to savings. So it'd be good if you could tell us a bit more about where how good a picture they are, how big a commitment there is to getting that more strategic, and how confident you are that the improvement and transformation is in those savings as well as rather than simply cuts. The other thing that would be useful to know is to get, if it's possible, to update the forecast for budget gaps in the coming 3 years, given that they've now adopted the 25-26 budget, reflecting the various changes in funding, council tax, etc. And last, on capital, can you say a bit more about the delivery of the programme as well as the spend? Does the as to a higher level of spend actually reflect a higher proportion of the projects being delivered?
Thank you. There's a lot within that. I'll start on savings and budget gap, and I'll bring Mark in as well on that, and then Mark can pick up specifically on capital as well. So firstly, on savings, I think as my report highlights, the council has a good track record of delivering savings, and it's delivered 92% and 98% of planned savings in 22-23 and 23-24. And a significant number of those were recurring savings. And Mark can say a little bit more about how those savings were made. But I think the main measures have been around operational and policy cost savings across service areas, as well as inflationary increases to fees and charges. I think, however, the key thing that the auditor highlighted is that the council doesn't have a single dedicated savings plan that brings all of those areas into one place, and that savings are considered at an operational level. So that's an area that I'd really encourage the council to look at going forward, is how they bring together those savings plans to enable a more strategic approach to considering the range of savings options. So particularly as you highlighted, Mike, they've got some difficult, as many councils have, decisions ahead in terms of closing budget gap. In terms of the estimates to the budget gap, so the council takes an approach to forecasting with 3 scenarios: worst, mid-range, and best. And my Controller of Audit report highlights that their mid-range scenario that they are forecasting is a cumulative budget gap of 28.6 million by the end of 2029-30. Now, obviously, they'll be looking at how they are updating that analysis following the 2025-26 budget decision. But I understand that paper that they presented to the council at that time suggested little movement in that mid-range scenario. But that's obviously something that we'll be looking at further in due course. I think we might also come back to transformation in a bit more detail, which I think was part of that question. But perhaps, Mark, if you want to say a bit more about the savings that they have made as well as capital, and then we might come back to transformation.
Absolutely. So in terms of my concerns around officers being able to find savings, there's no concerns in regard to that. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like there's a burning platform like there are at other councils at the moment. But longer term, things are going to be more challenging. And therefore, that was our point around recommending that those strategic saving plans are put in place so that you can start thinking further ahead and along the line. And we're going to speak about it later, potentially link that to transformation. But again, it's that strategic view in regard to the savings that we made the recommendation. And again, making sure that those are aligned to longer term goals as well, because there's a new corporate plan coming into place. So that might come into play, and there must be a synergy between all of that as well. So my observation from other councils is when you've got that strategic saving plan and tracker in place, and that gets reported to members, it does focus and crystallise things a lot more than it does than having a look down the back of the sofa to find this year's savings. And that was our logic in that regard.
Savings monitored at the service level.
They monitored at service level, and they do go up to members. They are monitored, but they're split between operational and policy savings. And I think over time you're going to be moving into those policy type savings, which is where transformation and things like that would be more prevalent, if that made sense.
And what do you want to say a bit about the capital programme and capital slippage, I think, in particular?
Yeah, so understand whether the spend profile reflects the level of delivery of projects that was expected.
My understanding is that they cut the cloth to suit in terms of the capital plan. So some years they will report that under enrolled spend, but if you look at the long-term projection, they're still projecting that they will meet the capital programme budget and deliver those capital programmes. It wasn't something that we highlighted as a risk as part of our assessment, so we didn't look at it in too much detail on the basis that the reporting that was there did allude to them meeting that budget over the term of the capital programme, which I think was 222 million at the time of our numbers.
And any understanding if there are any specific issues of why slippage happens, or is it just project by project.
So if you, yeah, it's project by project, and if you have a look in the budget report, and it does give you a bit of narrative as in terms of that. Some of it is the income wasn't received in the current year, therefore plan slipped, and it's matching income and expenditure in terms of how they've set that out in the capital programme.
Derek?
Thanks, Chair. I'll try not to repeat the questions, but maybe come at it from a slightly different angle. But it struck me in reading the report that obviously when we look at one council per month on the cycle, the timing is now quite challenging, probably, given that the evidence that we're presented with is based on financial year 23-24, and we're now just at the stage where the council set its budget for 25-26. So I think, like Mike, I'm keen to kind of tease out an update position on the council. So I suppose the things I took from that was strong financial management. I think the base is there. The council has a history of achieving savings, and they are modelling different scenarios. I noticed you were careful in your language. You talked about a medium-term financial plan rather than a strategy. And to me, that was a key distinction. So I'm keen to explore the ownership of the financial challenges facing the council. I didn't find that clear from the report. I think you probably hinted at it, but from a senior management and a political level, is there awareness and ownership of the challenges ahead? I got the feeling from the point, admittedly this is 23-24, maybe a slightly different view to you, Helena. The report talks about 27% of savings being non-recurring, which I thought was quite a significant proportion. And the council has used loans fund savings, the service concessions funding. I had a suspicion they'd use that to plug the gaps. And what I'm not picking up is a strategic direction to use the resources that it has to address the sort of longer term financial position. So an updated view on that. And in regards to the 25-26 budget, I'm very keen to understand how that discussion went. I'm aware that the council encountered major difficulties over its proposals for 24-25. And that resulted in a change of administration within the council. So in terms of setting its budget for 25-26, from your observations, you'll undoubtedly have had, how well did the council work together at a political level and the relationship between politicians and officers to deliver a balanced budget for 25-26? So that's on the sort of financial management. I did have another, if I could, Chair, just one, maybe a technical question. I noticed in your annual audit report, there was reference made to dormant bank accounts, which worried me slightly. I think particularly since the Commission just issued a Section 102 report recently, not about this council, and I suppose not a similar matter, but it did strike me that there was a concern there, and I'd have to say that the council's response confused me, if I could put it maybe more generously, and I didn't understand where the council was defending its position with regard to that, and the idea of having dormant bank accounts, which don't seem to serve in any did concern me. So it'd be interesting to get your view from an audit perspective on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, let's do the bank. I'll bring in Mark to cover bank accounts, and then we'll come back to some of the other points.
So in terms of dormant bank accounts, lots of our clients, lots of our consultants say that's the bank position in the accounts, and there's the bank accounts. Yeah, to back that up. And I always say I'm not that bothered. It's the bank accounts that you haven't told me about. So we always do an emissions test, and that's when that was drawn through. If I'm honest, I can kind of see their point of view in saying that we keep these open in terms of treasury management purposes. They might need them. But I'd like to see that those are monitored and that somebody looks at them at some point during the year, particularly towards the year end, and has oversight over those accounts. It's a recommendation in my report from last year. It'll get followed up again this year, so I'll probably have more to tell you in regard to 24,
I'm
25.
struggling to understand why treasury management requires them to hold separate bank accounts. That's certainly not something from my own experience that I've done, but happy if you follow up on it. That's fine, thanks.
Should we come then to some of the other questions that you raised, Derek? And I'll start with, I suppose, this question around strategic ownership of the financial challenges and risks. And Mark might want to say a bit more, and then come in particularly around what he's observed around the budget setting process, member relationships around that. I think within the annual audit report, there is detail on the council's financial management culture, including its adoption of the local code of corporate governance, which sets out how it manages risks and performance through internal controls and strong public financial management. The council does have an established budget process, which is reported to the Policy and Resources Committees and ensures that members are kept up to date on the financial assumptions and the pressures that are affecting future years' estimates as well. Mark wants to say a bit more about this, but they've obviously confirmed that arrangements are in place to link the medium-term financial plan to corporate objectives. I think finally, it's worth highlighting that the council also has an established risk management framework, which is regularly reviewed and monitored and reported to the Policy and Resources Committee. And again, that includes looking at the changing assumptions around the medium term, around demand, and how those feed through into the medium term financial plan. So I think Mark wants to say a bit more about that, but there does look to be that strong collective approach to managing finances and the risks associated with them. I think in terms of the budget setting process and more generally member relationships, there are again established frameworks that are in place to support discussions, including across party budget group that Mark might want to say a little bit more about as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, certainly from my observations that it's a very strong officer group in terms of their relationship with the members as well. Also looking at the reports and being present in the audit committees, it's not evident to me that there's any issues between officers and members. That said, it's quite new, and that said, it links to that point around the strategic savings plans as well. And that was in the back of my mind, thinking it's a new administration, and therefore things might become more difficult down the line, and that's when those tensions do tend to manifest. So, but at the moment, I don't think there is that issue.
No, that's reassuring, thanks.
Anybody else want to ask around the finance? We've got several more areas, so on the basis of no questions, then we go on to performance. Jennifer.
Mine on performance, I thought it was going to be Derek, but
Apologies, no, you're right, it's Derek.
No, I'm happy to.
Okay.
I think there's also picking up from the report so about the performance report in the council. So I'd be very keen to just to expand on that about how well the council is managing its performance. Your report highlighted areas where performance seems to have deteriorated. Equally, there are areas where there's been quite good performance. So it seemed quite a mixed bag in that. So what is the council doing about performance to improve the areas that it's not performing as well? And
so the council reports on performance at a number of different levels. It's got a corporate plan, it's got its business plan, and then its area plan, and it reports on performance across each of those. But I think the area that the auditors have highlighted is that there's scope to join that up more. And I mentioned in my introduction the golden thread linking all of these different reports together. Mark might want to say a bit more about that, but the particular recommendation is having some snappier KPIs that help bring that all together. I do think that performance reporting and improvement is an area where the council has recognised that there are improvements to make, and I think crucially it's committed to update its corporate improvement plan, which is the key document I think that brings together all their improvement activities and the evidence to support that, so including their assessments of the local government benchmarking framework, their self-assessment as well as obviously audit evidence as well. That's still in train being developed. So I think at this point, you know, that's an area that we'll want to come back and look at in more detail, I think, in terms of how it's bringing that performance improvement story together through that document. Mark, I don't know if you've anything else to add.
Yeah, from our perspective, it was, we can clearly see that the council does have the established arrangements in to monitor and enhance performance. There's that multitude of different strategies and methods of doing that. I think it's quite challenging for a member of the public to say how they are managing those strategic performance metrics, and that's what our recommendation is based on. And I do not like the phrase golden thread, but that sums it up, I think.
Okay, Jennifer, do you have any additionals you want to pick up?
No, I'm happy with that.
Thank you. Okay. Mike?
Can I ask, just in terms of the new plan, can you say a little about how big a shift that is in the policy and therefore performance measures?
So I'm not sure we know the answer to that because the new corporate plan is being developed at this point, so it's not been finalised. So I think it's due later this spring, and I think at that point, that's when that question, you know, how big a change is that, and what does that mean in terms of the supporting policies? I think will be key.
Discussions with officers. I think there's 4 or 5 different work streams going on in regard to that. So it is quite a big piece of work, but it is progressing, and as we say, should be with us soon.
Yeah, that takes us to transformation theme, and Carol, you.
Thank you. So thank you for the report. Really encouraging to see the current savings that you've got in there on the face of it. I suppose my question is around transformation. They're obviously doing some sort of transformation to get those savings, but what I can't see is what type of transformation, whether it's explicit or implicit, and whether you think the transformation is going to be enough to actually drive the savings need in the future, and the needs of the services and the financial gap in the future, and really what sort of transformation things they're actually doing to deliver these savings, and whether that needs to be strengthened and brought more to the fore. Is it luck and chance, or is it actually proper focusing on transformation? And if they're not focusing, how confident are you that they will focus on it?
Yeah, so I think transformation is obviously going to be the theme of the next best value thematic, so not something that was a specific focus for this year. Having said that, I think there are some things that it is worth highlighting. And the first of those I'd flag is actually we can see transformation happening in some of the examples in the best value thematic around workforce innovation. You know, for example, drones delivering school meals, as an example, feels transformative. And I think we can also see there's work ongoing on internal change and transformation through the Connect for Success workstream that the council has, which is around how they are transforming their own internal processes, how they're using things like Power BI, digital technology and AI as such. And Mark might want to come and give a bit more of a flavour of that. But I think what we don't have at the moment, and that's not to say that it doesn't exist, it's just not something that we looked at, is a sense of how all of that comes together in as to whether there is a transformation programme. As I say, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that I don't think is something that we focused on in the audit work. But I think we can see that transformation and change is embedded in some of the areas that I've already highlighted. And as we know, actually, we don't want transformation to sit on the side. Actually, it's about how it is embedded in things that are happening. And I think, as I say, we can see some areas where the council clearly has been an early adopter of technology. I think there was a great example around registers and how it's using births and certificates and getting online quick to adopt that. that technology. I think the final thing though that does feel relevant to come back to is that point around savings and how those savings are being made at an operational level, and bringing that to have that more strategic oversight. Do you think that would be helpful from a transformation space? But that's obviously something that we'll be looking at in more detail in the audit work that will be taking place currently. Mark, I don't know if you've got any more by way of examples or anything more to add.
Some of the things that the council are doing, it's quite, I'd say innovative, and it's some things that I've never seen when a lot of councils in England. And some of it is they're probably ahead of the game, particularly in terms of remote working due to the geography and how the council has to work. So they might have rinsed lots of those transformation things already just because of the geography of the council. And some of the things that they do talk about is quite exciting in terms of innovation. But going back to what Helen has said, it's that transformation piece. When I think of transformation, it's about completing to a service redesign. But I don't think they're there yet, but I don't think they've had to be. So but again, it's linked to that strategic saving plan and that golden thread between all of the corporate plan, the medium-term financial plan, all of that sort of thing that has to link together to be able to deliver that. And that will be our focus going forward.
It's encouraging that it's there, but yeah, I think it does need that coming together.
Questions on transformation? Pieces to leadership. Andrew.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Helen and Mark, for the report. And in fact, take us back for this. You've touched on this several times. We go through the corporate plan performance improvement framework. And obviously there was this change in political leadership nearly 12 months ago now. Next month it'll be 12 months ago, a year. We've got a very congested electoral period coming up on the horizon in 2026 and 2027. And I think this type of work is not going to be on the front burner, it's going to be on the back burner. So there's a limited time period to get this finalised, I think. And I noticed you were very careful, Helen, in your opening comments when you said that the programme was going to be delivered later this spring. But in paragraph 11 on page 22 of the PDF in the government report, it says it would be delivered by March, which is 2025, which is now. So it just rings slight alarm bells. And I think you said a minute ago, Mark, later this spring as well. And it'll be with us soon. I would just really be keen to hear any further reassurance about how imminent this rewrite of the corporate plan and performance improvement framework is, because they are obviously crucial foundational documentation for the council going forward. And I think there is a limited time now to get it right and finish it before it'll be overtaken by other events.
I don't mean to ring alarm bells.
No, it rings alarm bells for me.
I'm not sure we know when it will happen, but I guess that we'll know when it's published, I suppose, is the main thing. But
an auditor caveat I'm not going to talk about until I've seen it, and that's probably more than what we've been, as we have been in that regard.
But you're confident that sufficient resource has been put to this now, and that
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
is understood.
Yeah, so we have had communications with the officer responsible, and you can tell, can't you, when somebody's
Sure.
yeah, not delivering. So I am confident, yes.
So
But given it's delayed and we haven't got sight when it's going to happen.
I don't know that it is.
I don't think it is delayed. I'm just not going to comment because I've not seen it.
And is that, release one word, are we seeing any slowdown of the implementation of the previous plan and activities as a consequence? I'm not sure whether they're going to continue on to the next plan.
So they've continued with the old metrics, and that's,
Fine.
yeah, that's been ongoing at the same time as.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, no, thanks. That's helpful. Thanks very much.
Anybody else got questions on leadership, Malcolm?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, this is either been touched on partially in answer to Derek's question on finances, but I am interested in member officer relations, how well they work together, but particularly how well they work together in driving improvement and transformation. And is there any, what mechanisms do they have in place to help aid this? You know, I mean, are members receiving appropriate training, for example?
So I bring Mark in to talk a bit about some of his observations as well at meetings, but I think there are a number of mechanisms that are in place to support good working relationships. So we've already touched on a cross-party budget working group to ensure that there's early engagement and consensus on budget proposals. There are also member seminars on issues of interest, and the chief exec has joint monthly meetings with all group leaders as well. So I think, you know, those are the kinds of mechanisms that we've seen elsewhere. But I'll bring Mark in to share some of his observations as well from attending council meetings.
So those things are in place, and then in terms of observation of attendance, I've not noticed any significant issues in that regard.
Any other questions on leadership? That takes us into workforce. Jenna, anything on that?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose the first observation is there was some, in your covering report, Eleanor, and in the underpinning report, there's quite a lot of encouraging things around council has a workforce plan, they have some detailed workforce matrices, those seem to be being shared. So they seem to have the right infrastructure in place, I suppose, to do workforce planning. I particularly picked up, though, that they're worried about, or I infer that they're worried about the increasing trend on the reliance on temporary and agency staff. And then the fact that these colleagues seem to be in high numbers before their contracts end, and the council wants to use its agile workforce plan to address this. I suppose my reflection was, do we know that the council understand why they've ended up relying on agency staff? Because one, I would infer it's because they've got permanent staff who've left and they've needed to fill gaps. And then do they know why the contract colleagues are leaving, and is there something they need to fix? So I suppose it's are they going to fix the underlying issues that have caused the problem, and whether you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of the detail we have on some of those underlying issues, but I think the Agile project, I think, sheds a bit of light on that, in that, as I understand it, the aim of the project is to reduce the number of temporary positions that they are advertising by creating more permanent posts, but those posts have sort of a wider skill set and set of responsibilities that enable people then to move to the different areas which would normally have been advertised temporarily, I think. So the goal is to create a more permanent pool that can be allocated as necessary to those different sort of tasks that would have been filled more by temporary staff. Mark, I explain that.
Yeah.
Right.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, do we know anything about the retention rates on permanent staff? Because you could put a lot of effort into creating more permanent roles, but actually, if permanent people are also leaving, do we know anything about that?
I don't have any information on that one.
Thank you. I had one follow-up question, which was sort of drawing out some good practice, if I may, Joe. I noted, and Mark, you said it, that because they've had to do remote working for much longer than other people have had to adopt it, they seem to be ahead of the game. And I just wonder, one of the things we've often talked about as a commission is, when you do remote and flexible working, do people understand the longer term impact on things like colleague wellbeing, colleague development? And I wonder if we've seen any evidence from Argyll and Bute about whether they can share light with other councils, because I think every council seems to be reviewing its flexible working plan. And is there anything they can share about understanding the long-term impact of how that affects? So does the council, for example, do a wellbeing survey, and does that show that actually everybody's fine, despite the fact they've been remote working for a very long time?
So I think the council was intending to review the impact of its flexible and hybrid working policy in December, and I think that was intended to cover service quality and wellbeing. I don't know if we have the detail of whether that review has concluded. We haven't seen that, but I think, you know, the intention was definitely there.
Something for us to keep an eye on in the future.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Jennifer. Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's linked to that. I was interested in the growing our own framework. And I just wondered, you know, has it provided any positive outcomes? And is this something that, or is this practice something they could share with other councils, particularly smaller rural councils and even IJBs for that matter?
Yeah, again, I'm not sure we know the details of that, though I'll let Mark tell me if that's different, but I think generally on the Grow Your Own, I mean, that is something that we have seen other councils adopting as well. And I know, as we've discussed before, Solace did a piece of work last summer looking across, actually sharing some examples around workforce challenges and some of the case studies as well. And I know that sharing that learning is very much something that Solace were looking to do as part of that. So I don't know how they engaged with that.
I can give you a live example of it today. So at the audit committee, we found out that one of the internal auditors had been funded to do her chartered internal audit qualifications, and she's qualified, and that was all part of that Grow Your Own policy.
Any other questions on workforce? That takes us then to community engagements.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the areas that we're keen to see is how well councils are engaging with communities on budgets in particular. And I noted that they have used a budget simulator tool at the council to quite good effect and got some quite good engagement back on that. And they've also got plans around a new community engagement framework. And I just wondered if you had any more information about how that's coming along and whether that might have any other innovative approaches that might be useful for other councils to hear about potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think the budget simulator was really interesting, actually. I think there was, I highlighted in my report, actually take-up of it declined significantly in between the 2 years in terms of, you know, the engagement with it. And I think, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't continue the budget simulator this year because of the decline in engagement against the actual time that it creates to, you know, actually take quite a bit of time and effort to put all of that data into a simulator. But they did still consult on their budget. And I think they had a really good response rate. I think they had nearly 2,000 comments to their 25-26 budget consultation. So like you, I thought the budget simulator was really interesting, but actually it does show the challenges with it too. Just on the wider community engagement, I think, again, there were some examples highlighted in the best value thematics around regular satisfaction surveys as well. On the specifics of the community engagement framework, I believe that was presented and approved at a December meeting of the Policy and Resource Committee, but I'm not sure beyond that I've got anything further to add at this point.
And do we know whether the community engagement and the reach out changed priorities or spending decisions?
I don't know if I know the detail.
I don't know the detail of that.
So they get the information, what do we know what to do with it?
So I think the simulator, I think there is a reference to that being used and informing decisions, I think. But as to the 25-26 budget consultation, I'm not sure we've looked at the detail of that.
Any other questions on community engagement? Anyone? I'll come.
Chair, could I go back and ask a quick
Please.
question on workforce? That's
Yes,
just,
go
if
for
that's
it.
okay. No, what it is, I noticed in the report there was in terms of remote working, there's mention of that it has increased the human resources pool, which it would. But is there any sense, or do we know, is there any way telling how many of the remote workers are actually not living within the council area?
Do not
If possible,
I don't have that information.
Thanks.
Nicola.
Thank you, Joe. I had just a follow-up question really in terms of community engagement, please. So I understand that the comprehensive community engagement plan is in development, and I've heard what was said about the budget tool. I just wonder whether there is any more information on where the accountability or leadership for community involvement engagement rests within Argyll and Bute Council, just to know what the capacity aligned to that is. That would be great. Thanks.
Mark, I don't know if that's something that you've got.
It's not something, I've not got the detail, but we do report on an area basis, certainly in terms of performance and things like that. But it's not something we drilled into as part of our report.
Was there anything specifically you were looking for, Nicola, on that question? If they don't have the data, the aggregate, is there any particular issue we're trying to address?
I suppose what I'm getting at is it sounds as though there is an effort underway to have a more comprehensive approach beyond the budgetary consultation. Just keen to know where the leadership for that sits within the council itself, so that as we go forward, we would be confident about tracking progress if we know about the ownership, where the ownership for that lies.
I mean, I think it would probably come back to the community engagement group that I think they have established that is taking forward the work on developing the framework. I think that's, but within the overall sort of structure and who is on that group and how that's made up, I'm not sure we have the detail of that, but they obviously have this community engagement group which is leading on the work.
And do we have outcome expectations from that group?
Again, I'm not sure, but I think, as I said at the beginning, that the community framework was presented to a policy and resources committee, which I think again highlights
Following up.
the I suppose the oversight and interest in that work.
So there is a central group that is having oversight of that.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just, you may not be able to say, but community asset transfers, how, in a council like Argyll and Bute, I should imagine that would be profitable, not that word, type of area where there are very distinct communities with scope. Has it figured in the work around communities?
It's not something we focused on part of the audit.
It's certainly, as you say, Mike, as more difficult decisions have to be taken, community asset transfer might be one of the options that need to be looked at. So it's maybe something we can. It's something we can ponder at private session. If there are no more questions for Mark and Hannah, I shall close this down because we will have a session in private to discuss how we're going to take this one forward. Thank you for your input, Mark.
Thank you.
This is 6. That's Joe's coming back up. Again, through the board's Joe.
Thanks, Chair.
I assume it's read, but offer you the chance to kind of highlight any particular thing you want us to discuss, or I'll open for.
No, just happy to answer questions. Obviously, a big focus of the past month has been the council budget setting. So that's reflected in the report, and I've mentioned there's a number of resources available to members to look into that in more detail, and a range of other things to similarly, I guess, to delve into as you're interested in. But yeah, happy to answer any questions.
So questions for Joe on this. I don't typically like to see my name in front of the page, but it's there. Done an awful lot of work, Mike.
I just had a very small one. So I was interested by the per capita in paragraph 14, the data on per capita spend in England. A long time since I've read this topic. Is it something you could replicate here just to get that sort of sense? Because I think in England, while there's a real term increase overall, over a certain time period, the per capita spend is very much reduced, and to get an interesting additional insight.
Nothing really to add to that. That's captured the trends that are reflected in the report, and obviously feeds into that wider picture of where local government finance is in England.
It's maybe something we could speak to Alison about, yeah, as a possible set of additional metrics. It's going to give us something extra. Anything else for Joe? Christine?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Again, quite a lot to get through and all very informative. Thank you very much. Paragraph 8 mentions the extra national insurance contributions and contribution from national government to local government for that. But there is a shortfall. Is there any indication yet coming from councils as to where they intend to find that shortfall?
I guess each council will have, to make its own decisions as to how to meet that. I mentioned that kind of proportion that the local government is getting from the Scottish Government is broadly in line with the proportion the Scottish Government has itself in turn got from UK government. So it's a public sector wide issue of that gap between that, and it relates to that point of public sector in Scotland being proportionally larger than the rest of the UK, and so therefore the Barnet formula doesn't quite cover that. There was some discussion around whether essentially that sort of corresponds to council tax increases. A message from the Cabinet Secretary saying that the funding provided to local government would reduce the need for large council tax increases, but at the same time there is that gap to fill, even with the budgets the councils were already in the process of setting. So it is a pressure that councils and as with the rest of the public sector will have to find a way to bridge, and different councils will have had different means and different decisions to make in terms of how to do that. And it may be something that we're able to cover in the local government budgets briefing as to whether there was any change in the way that the budgets were shaped to respond to that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pick up on the paragraph 16 East Renfrewshire Council, because I think they made a decision to do something that was uncomfortable, and then they stopped. Give you any background as to what the pressure was, or the extent to which that budget 2.2 billion, sorry, the impact of that, mean the light on the budget and everything like that?
I think it was broadly similar to the way in which across a number of councils, proposals that were put forward were then pulled back. I think this one it was almost a sense of calling it in for further scrutiny as to how they were planning to deliver that. It did come as a bit of a surprise to me, because the previous month's report reflected the story at the time, which was that this was something that, as we heard in the evidence session, was something that had been deferred from pre-COVID. And it seemed like they were all set to go ahead. So but a political decision was made within the council to actually look at that a little bit further, give it a bit more scrutiny. And so therefore they did defer it, and of course then had to put something in place to sort of cover in the interim how they were going to fund that in the coming year.
Because that's a gap for next year then, if they don't do it, starting off -2.2. A sign of the times, I fear, Any other questions for Joe and the local government? Sorry, Derek.
Sorry, no,
Sorry.
just maybe a comment on the back of that, because I noticed how East Renfrewshire funding that from an underspend in the current year. And it's maybe, I'm looking at Blythe now, is something we can pick up in the work that we're doing with the overview report, because if councils are underspending, I don't want to use the collect when we're talking about one in particular, but it's interesting to see how that fits in with the financial pressures that councils are identifying, the challenges of balancing their budgets. If at the end of the day they're producing an underspend, it sounds for that council it looks quite a material underspend. That might not be the same in other councils, but I think it's something we should be mindful of as part of the work that we're doing in terms of the overview report.
Not aware of the detail of how that underspend has arisen, but of course there's a broader picture where in many cases underspend are resulting from things like not being able to fill vacancies, therefore not having staff costs arising from that. It may or may not be that's how that underspend has arisen, or there may be a combination of factors.
Any other questions for Joe? Okay, thank you very much, Joe. Good report. That takes us to item 7, Chair's update. There's a paper of all the things I've been doing for since the last meeting. And I think the only thing I wanted to pick up is the fact that we're beginning to engage wider stakeholder engagement against around discussing our work programme and some of the key issues with the players. So we met with the Solus Chair and the Vice Chair, Des Murray and Pippa Mill, Andrew and I, to start the conversation, and they're coming to the Commission in April. We'll get a bit more of a chance to have a chat with them about what Solus is doing. To the parliamentary translation. I'm happy to take questions on any other item on the paper presented. I've been kept busy. Item 8, any other business for the public session today? Anybody else, anything else they want to bring up to the public session? Based on that basis, can I ask Lee to switch off the recording? We will have to leave. And we will have to leave this. Stopped, yep.